stage co-founder and head of programming at In Creative Company, Mara Webster.
Thank you so much for coming out. Isn't it a stunning series? All the Light We Cannot See spent more than 200 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, sold more than 5.5 million copies worldwide, and was also the winner of the 2015 Pulitzer Prize. Please join me in giving a huge welcome to our incredibly esteemed panel this evening, starting with supervisor, sound editing, and re-recording mixer, Craig Henighan. Editor, Dean Zimmerman. Cast member, Louis Hofmann. Actor, Aria Loberti. And from 21 Laps Entertainment, executive producer Dan Levine. And executive producer and director, Shawn Levy. I mean, a huge congratulations on this incredible series. And Shawn, I wanted to start with you and just talking about the journey and bringing this to screen, because I love how much passion you've had from the moment that you read the book and you were interested in adapting it, but the rights weren't initially available. And you made sure that everybody around you knew if the rights ever become available, I definitely want to bring this to screen. And I was interested if during that time where you were waiting to see if this was going to become possible, were you still starting to think visually and kind of cinematically about how you might adapt it?
The truth is, just by like a show of applause, who was familiar with the book long before the show? Yeah. So, like you, Dan and I, we have a company called 21 Laps, and we read the book, and it was unavailable. It was being developed as a movie by Scott Rudin at Searchlight, I believe, and that was just the end of that. And the truth is, we would talk about, well, let's keep our ear to the ground. Let's be patient. And if anything stumbles on the way to the starting line for this adaptation as a feature, let's be ready. So I didn't presume to think that we would get it, but we were just kind of, frankly, more patient than I ever am. And we stayed vigilant. And when we heard that, you know what, it was too much story to fit into a 2-hour movie, our whole approach to Tony Doerr, who wrote this incredible novel, was let's not try to shrink your book. Let's honor your book, and let's use this emerging format of the limited series to do right by it.
It's so great, and off the back of that, Dan, because you've been so involved from the very beginning of this project as well, especially once you realized it was going to be a limited series and that was going to allow the space to really live and breathe in the story and these characters in this beautiful way. What felt important to you and the rest of the producers on this project in making sure that you captured as those touch points?
Well, key was finding the right writer, which was Stephen Knight, and we were so thrilled. We chased him for years, and we sent him the book, and he was in love with the book, and it really was about honoring what's there, because obviously there's huge fans of the book, and you don't want to disappoint them, but as Stephen said, there are certain things that are very internal in the book that deserve, to be fleshed out and expanded upon, and we gave him some of the freedom to do that, and it was a huge thrill for us that Anthony Doerr, every step of the way, just applauded that and was delighted by these scenes that Stephen created that weren't in the book. But I think we captured the essence of the book and the key scenes in the book. It's still about what the book's about, and so that was critical to us.
And I mean, Aria, you were raising your hand there as well, of being a huge fan of the book. And I've loved that I've heard you talk about one of the scenes in the book that really meant a lot to you to get to capture was when all the leaflets kind of fall down and she doesn't necessarily know what's imminent, but she gets a sense that something is coming. And I was interested in how your relationship with the book also really helped you as you dove into the scripts to develop this character and to dive into scenes like that.
That was one of the first days, maybe the second day, I think, of filming. So it was such a big moment because it felt like I was really living the book that I had loved from when it came out. And so that was really extraordinary. But I wasn't an actor. I'd never taken an acting class in my life. I'd never been a part of that world, had never aspired necessarily to do that. And so I really only came into this with the knowledge of that text, which was so very special to me. When I looked at the script for the first time, I was doing it as a fangirl, more so than as someone preparing to play the part. So I really just took my time with I put all of her, I like downloaded the ebook and put it on my computer, and I put all of her scenes in chronological order and then matched them up with the screenplay, and I had a spreadsheet, and then I paired that with songs and then with scents. And like I just tried to find her in the ways that I knew how, because I was an academic, so I tried to like use that skill. But really it was just grounded in what does this character make me feel, how does she act on the page, and it's so internal. For those of you who've read it, it's like it's so inside her head, and the script like it doesn't necessarily do that because it's for a visual medium, and how can I bring that in such a way that the audience can feel these things that she feels without me having to do a voiceover or explain them or do like, look in the camera like I'm on The Office or something. So it was a challenge, but it was, still is like the greatest privilege of my life. I think it always will be, and I'm just really grateful to Shawn and Dan and everyone for allowing me to do it.
It's beautiful, John. And Lewis, in talking about you, it sounds like one of the challenges with your character was, he's a little bit more internalized, and he can sometimes be a little bit more passive and withheld, and yet you still have that aspect of how do I make sure that the audience is connecting with his inner world, because there's so much going on beneath the surface with him, and you've really managed to make us feel that throughout the series. And so what were the challenges that came with that for you?
Well, thank you for coming anyway. That's like the concept. I had done a few characters that are very internal. I think that's always a huge challenge, to find the sort of, not to show too much, but to still feel like you can let the audience inside of that mind and inside of that, the feeling of the character. I mean, a huge part for me was actually the radio. I went in early and I did a workshop on radios. I took every single piece and pieced them together. I learned how to build a radio, I learned how to understand the radio. And I think, but not only the physical part, which I really enjoyed, and it's kind of like a way to get to know the character without having to think too much intellectually about their decisions, but rather than through a feeling getting to know the character. But I think one of the most beautiful things about this is like this intangible thing of, the frequencies, the what's in the air. I mean, it's love really, and that is something, that intangible thing is what connects the two characters and what also drives him. And that was for me very fascinating, to have this sort of force that he is driven by, that you can't tell, that is intangible, but that's the sort of, I think that's what really intrigued me, and that's what I tried.
Yeah, no, it's so well done. And Dean, in talking about the editing of this, I love the delicacy of the pacing. There's moments where there's a real momentum and a real engine to the pacing, because there needs to be, particularly when things feel like they're closing in around Marie. And yet there's moments where you really allow us just to sit in the deliciousness of these characters as well. And so throughout the editing process, how did you kind of find the balance between those two different worlds?
Well, that's what me and Shawn had talked about when we went into it, because coming off of Stranger Things and the other big action movies that we've done together, we both were like, we need to be able to have those moments where we can sit in silence and sit in these moments with these characters. And also for me personally, just the gravity of the base of the book, which is, in this Nazi world, like being true to that story as well. And honoring that sensibility and being so delicate with it, that really kind of led how we would cut certain things and how fast we would want to get through them, or let people into that kind of dark part of our history.
And I mean, similarly, Craig, when you work on the sound for any project, it's always so vital and so important, but it feels like especially so in this project, where you have a central character who doesn't have sight, and the show's been made in such a way that it feels so tangible, and like all of the other senses are heightened so that we connect to Marie in that way. And so how did you set about thinking about sound from the perspective of Marie at the center of it in a different way?
I think it's exactly that. It's heightening sounds that are all around her. The simplest stuff. One of the first scenes when she walks down the staircase, those creaks that you hear are exactly the same creaks that we use in chapter 4 when he's going up the stairs. It's like little Easter eggs of those sort of sonic details that allow, I think, anybody to watch it as an audience to sort of feel like they're submersed into the world. and sort of picking up on the pacing of what Shawn and Dean did in the editing, it's just adding that extra layer of dynamics so you can go loud and big. I mean, World War II is such a rich sort of tapestry for sound. We were able to sort of get real radios from that era, and the first radio broadcast you hear, and you're seeing in the first episode in the bunker, is recorded through a period correct radio. So we didn't tweak it with, modern day technology. We tried to get the technology of that day and that.
I'm learning tonight, by the way. I had no idea. I'm very impressed. Wow, you do
20
your job
years later.
I know we've been working together 20 years, but boy, you really.
Yeah, I mean that's
Nice
the
try.
fun thing about projects like this. I mean, any of your projects, obviously, but this one, and Louis touched on it. Just the research that you can do, and the amount of stuff that you can learn. And I mean, the internet is such an amazing place just to dig, like the church bell rings in St. Malo, just the way they would sound. We didn't use them a lot, but that's sort of the depths of those layers, how the waves crashed, against the walls and stuff. I mean, again, it's all subtext, it's all driven by story, but that's the things that us sound folks sort of like try to bring to the table.
No, I love those sorts of details. And I mean, off the back of that as well, for you, Shawn and Dan, I was interested in a lot of the conversations that you had creatively along the way about how do we make this feel really tangible for the audience and how do we heighten the rest of the senses of this show?
Well, I think, did they share the thing about kind of how we approach the casting? Did they show that to you guys tonight? So, the first and most important decision informed all later decisions. And that was deciding to tell this story with authenticity in its representation. And we did a global search, and I mean, Aria mentioned she was an academic. Aria was getting her PhD in rhetoric at Penn State. She's never acted before, she's never auditioned before. Am I right? Is it rhetoric?
Yeah.
And is it Penn State?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like,
Okay. So I graduated from college. I didn't know what the heck I wanted to do with my life, so I got a Fulbright scholarship, which is like.
she just got a Fulbright.
So I'm like, so I went to England, and thank you. Then I went to England, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And then I was like, well, I guess I already got into my PhD, so I went there, and then I lasted for like 2 weeks, guys. So it's okay.
Because we put out this global casting call, and among over 1,000 people, we found Aria and we found Nell, who, if you've seen the show, she plays young Marie. But I think starting from there, just a commitment to, obviously, we make stuff that's built to entertain and built to connect with an audience in an emotional way. But this project was different. The reason why I decided to direct all of them and basically just say no to all movies for over a year was this thing felt important. It felt like it was conveying themes about empathy and the sustaining of hope in the midst of darkness that mattered. It mattered when we made it. It matters more when we released it. It matters more when we're sitting here talking about it all these months later. And so just that commitment to authentic storytelling that started with the casting of Aria and Nell and went through the details of the sound work and the textures of the visual design, our cinematography, our art department, it just all stemmed from that desire to do right by this beautiful story and to tell it in an authentic way.
Was that similar for you, Dan?
Yeah, and I want to give Shawn a little more credit than he's taking, because there was a path of least resistance to cast a cited, famous actress to make it very easy for us. And Shawn was the one who said, no, we have to do this right. And to Netflix's credit, they didn't bat an eye and they said, you're right. And so I think that was the key first step of casting Aria and Nell, and that really set the tone for everything else.
And Aria, I also wanted to ask you about some of the research elements that went into this for you as well. You were talking before about organizing all of the scenes together, but to Craig's point, you could spend forever researching this time period. There's so much material. So how did you set about looking at all of the research as a whole and then finding the pieces that were going to be key to your understanding of Marie as a character?
What was really interesting for me, especially as a first timer, was like finding what actually made sense as opposed to like dumping so much on myself and hoping something would stick. So as I went through the process, what was really valuable to me was listening to the old radio broadcasts, researching St. Malo, all of these little elements, but I couldn't necessarily go there, I couldn't be there. But what I could do was go out on set a little bit early. And so Shawn decided, and this was like the coolest thing ever, that for the first 3 weeks of filming, he was going to do Lewis's scenes, and he was going to construct the Shawn Levy Film School for me. And he basically let me like follow him around, and then I met with all the department heads and I learned how a set worked. So I was simultaneously trying to research like, okay, in this environment on a set, what will help me? And sometimes that was learning, like, you know, what would it have sounded like to turn on the radio and listen and get that like sense of doom or sense of hope. Sometimes that meant walking around Budapest where we were filming with a cane, which is not something that I use. Something that I learned how to use, but not something that I use, but like walking around with my prop cane to understand more of like how she would feel her way around with this device. And what's really interesting is for me, like I said, I learned how to use a cane, but the cane today is very, very different. It doesn't feel anything like the one she used. So I was learning an entirely new way of walking. And that was like kind of groundbreaking for me to find my way into the character. And just to understand sort of like how she would use her hands with the Braille. Again, I learned a little bit of Braille, but because I am low vision and not totally blind, it wasn't something I really depended on. But I really did a lot of research into like, I'm bad at Braille. She wouldn't have had a formal Braille teacher because of the conditions in which she grew up in. How could I use my bad habits, which someone who did grow up with full sight might not have, to educate, you know, myself and then educate the audience. So every layer I put into her was really, you know, how would someone who grew up in this historical moment be navigating their space? And that doesn't always have to do with sight. I also would like to just take a really quick moment, because I don't think this has been said yet, and I don't think Shawn has given himself any credit. Shawn was directing a multilingual crew. He did this partially in French and in English. A lot of our crew members spoke French or Hungarian. So he was not only working with actors who, you know, were living a whole different experience from him, learning about how we see the world, but also working with people, you know, from all walks of life who spoke lots of different languages and still created the beautiful product that he created. And I think that hasn't been said before, and that deserves a round of applause.
It's really incredible to think about that skill set. And Lewis, in talking a little bit more about how you developed your character, the scripts and the story on screen and the book are so rich in terms of his backstory and his childhood. How crucial were those elements in finding him in the present and just really being able to dig so deep into him? It must be such a gift.
I mean, it's such a gift to have this beautiful book, which is, I mean, you've talked about it a little bit, but it's, obviously you can't put in a script what there is in a book, and it's so, there's so many beautiful details in there, and just little things you can pick up on, which you can sort of paint the character. And I mean, I think both of us were really lucky that the ones that played our little selves were very cute, and that creates an instant like bond to the audience and a bigger understanding for your character, I suppose. But yeah, of course, you dig as deep as possible and you build a couple of radios, and then you're ready to play Werner, I guess.
I feel like we should have brought one out on stage for you to build while we talked.
You have 60 seconds. Go.
I mean, I've bragged with this before, but I learned to build a functioning radio under a minute. Which is pretty cool.
I'm sure that's going to be a super useful skill in your future.
Yeah. Well, it wouldn't work nowadays, okay? But it would have worked if I was
more than impressive.
Less traffic. It would have worked.
And Dean and Craig, I mean, in essence, throughout the story, we have these two different storylines happening side by side with our two central characters, and both in the present of their worlds and looking at their past and their childhoods. And I was interested in, through both the editing and the sound, how you wanted to create these unique and distinctive looks and feels and sounds for each of their worlds.
Well, and this is where having the longevity of 20 years working with this guy is like the most invaluable thing ever, because obviously me and Shawn have worked together longer than that. But we're almost a hive mind, so when Shawn shoots material, it speaks to me, so I know exactly how he wants it put together. But then when I do put it together, my first go-to is Craig, because I'm like, how do you take this and amplify it in a way, or lead me into a different way. He's 100% a part of the creative as well, just because his soundscapes and some of the ideas he has inform how I cut things either slow or faster. And it's because it's all sound, it's all music, and especially in a story like this where you want to have those peaks and valleys, you really need to work hand in hand with someone as talented as Craig, because it just gives you that freedom to explore and open your mind up a little bit more than you normally would, and kind of go off the page and let the material speak to you in a different way.
I would like to add something to this. I remember Shawn showing me material after, I don't know, the first couple of filming days. And this was the first time this had ever happened to me, that I saw like cut material with sound design a few days after we just shot it. What the hell?
Yeah, this is 20 years, right?
Right.
Well, I mean, this is a room of Television Academy voters, so I assume that, all of us in this room, we know the dream, right? The dream of our jobs, whatever aspect of storytelling we have, the dream of it is to collaborate with other creative people and find some kind of connection where you're bringing these different crafts and these different skills, but you're running towards the same end zone. And I really felt that on this. Obviously, this is very different. Many of us do Stranger Things for the last 9 years. Some of us have done movies together for over, 15 years. But what you're aspiring to is the same, which is that cohesion of crafts, where producers and actors and writers and editors and sound designers and mixers and all the rest of it are in some kind of harmony, and to work on something that felt more than built for entertainment, but built to say something that matters. It's a forever thing. And it's fun being here, and it's been thrilling to see the way audiences embrace this show, but the having come together to make something, that is the thing that lasts forever.
That's so beautiful. And Craig, and coming back to you, how were you setting about creating those distinctive feelings of sound, especially when you were doing it in a matter of days for rough cuts?
Yeah, I mean, the matter of days thing happened. I read the script and just kind of for fun, kind of just to kind of dip my toe into sort of like figuring out what the planes were going to be like. I did a little soundscape. I don't know if you remember, Shawn, but I did a little, I built a little 1.5, 2-minute soundscape of what the bombers might sound like coming in, and the bombing and then flying away and stuff, and then I sent it, and I think you actually might even used it during the first table read, again, to sort of get everybody into this sort of vibe, into like the rhythm of like what this world could be. And that's something that we've done in the past in other projects and stuff. And Shawn, the great thing with Shawn is he creates this, the word is overused, safe space to explore and to fail and to try and to experiment. But that's really what he does as the leader of the tribe, is like lets you do your thing within the framework of what he needs to sort of accomplish in a bigger goal, which is always support story, always support what is happening. It's just, after this many years, it becomes a shorthand of like what we can do. And I even just as silly as like, I know what frequencies he's gonna like peak on a little bit versus not. I mean, again, they're all subtle things, but they build up into, it's layers, it's all these layers, and the time to sort of experiment, and the time to sort of send stuff into the Avid so they can listen to it and figure it out, and then a lot of text messages back and forth, stuff like that.
It's a lot of, is that scene cut yet? You shot it 12 hours ago.
That's you get that, and then
I admitted
I
up front that patience was not a superpower.
No,
Right,
and so
it's not.
you get into that mode of just, you gotta get it done.
And we've also,
Yeah.
we've facilitated it too, so it's a bit of a like.
No.
Yeah, it's your
like-
fault.
Essentially, it's our
because
fault.
you spoiled
Because
me.
he's done that to us before, where he's called Dean and said, and then he'll call me. He's like, "Can you really do it quicker than that, or is it going to take 2 or 3 days?" And kind of stuff, So, anyways.
I mean, Shawn, you were talking about before the importance of authenticity, and I wanted to talk to you specifically about working with the blindness consultant on the show. Was it Joe Strucci?
Yeah.
Who also works on C, because it's not just about the logistics of that, it's so much about the character details that go into everyone.
It is, but this is interesting, right? Like Joe is a guy, Joe Strucci is our associate producer and our consultant around the whole kind of area of blindness. He generally works on shows, and his job is generally to instruct and coach sighted actors to play low vision or blind. On this show, he didn't need to do that because we cast Aria, we cast Nell.
They know what the experience is. They taught me what the experience is.
So Joe really leaned into a couple of areas. One was history and the research of what was, right?
What I described, that was Joe. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Like Joe would kind of, frankly, Aria doesn't need help with any educational matters, but he would help.
But he was the one who was like helping me delegate, because like I said, I'll just dump information on myself until I drown. And so he was the one helping like distill it down that way.
Whether it's was it a rubber tip cane? Was it a wooden tip cane?
Wood, which
right, it was wood in the 40s.
It was wood in the 40s, but it could have been rubber, or like it was also like, when did the white cane actually become a symbol? It was, I believe, like 1937 or 1939. And
yeah,
like,
Joe taught us a
lot
about that. He also, I think you would agree, Aria, made, I mean, anyone who's been on a set, these are loud, chaotic environments, and frankly, just building a workspace, a set, that was both accessible and cognizant of the way Aria and Nell navigate space and process. That was an education for me. So as far as how was Aria and Nell, what is the path from the trailer to the set? What is an appropriate level of chatter and volume on the set before it becomes overwhelming? Joe was an incredible resource and a partner to Aria and Dan and I and all of us who made it.
And Dan, also, Anthony is the author of the book, was very involved in this project, but it sounds like he was that beautiful collaborative partner that was there for any questions, happy to review anything, look at scripts, but also happy to let you guys have full creative freedom and control of it as well. And I just wanted to ask a little bit about that collaborative relationship with him throughout the development.
Yeah, it was really a treasured relationship for Shawn and I. I mean, this is a guy who won a Pulitzer, he wrote this incredible book, and we didn't want to mess it up. And to have him bless the scripts, particularly when there were some changes, meant everything to us. And he became a friend of ours. He came to set. He was our biggest cheerleader. Stephen Knight would send him drafts to fact check, and he'd come back to us with notes. He was a real collaborator.
Well, it was interesting, right? Because some people have, enjoyed nitpicking the differences between novel and show. And Tony, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, was like, what are people talking about? That was a book. This is a TV series. And he had an understanding from the get-go of the difference and the need, not only the leeway for adaptation, it's why it's called adaptation, not literal transposition. That's a clunkier term, so I'm not advocating anyone will use that. But Aria, did you want to say something?
No, he was such a cool person to talk to, and I can't process how amazing it was to meet him, but one of the things that we talked about at length was this idea of if you're not respecting the medium of film or of miniseries, you're not respecting the book. And so we talked about how it was just so meaningful to see, a book that I loved and a book that he obviously loves because he wrote it, that was translated in this way that people who wouldn't necessarily go pick up a 600-page historical fiction novel or might be intimidated by Pulitzer or anything would be able to watch the show and get the same message, the same feeling, and learn, and do something that Tony, as a sighted dude, could not do in portraying the authenticity of a blind girl's life and nuance of that life. As much as you can research it, you can't quite capture it in the same way as you can authentically. And so I think that that's what's so awesome about working with someone like him, is he is such a brilliant genius of a mind and really understands what it might take to translate something into a totally different medium and what that can bring to an audience and how it can frankly change the world, because I think this project really has for a whole population that has never once really had representation like this before, and it's awesome.
It is. And lastly, Shawn and Aria, I wanted to ask you about developing Marie's relationship with her father, played wonderfully by Mark Ruffalo, because it's such a beautiful relationship in the scenes where we get to see them together. But what is really lovely is the way that we feel that relationship permeate in the scenes where they're separated for so many years at a time. And I was interested in how you said about filming the scenes with him and making sure that we still felt him even when he wasn't there in this show.
You start by casting Mark Ruffalo, right? Like, Mark has an innate warmth and soulful quality that Aria felt instantly when I think your first encounter was maybe a walk through Central Park.
It was a walk through Central Park in the pouring rain,
Yeah.
and it started to thunder. And
But
then
the
my
connection
shoe
was,
untied,
I
and
remember
he
you.
threw himself on the ground to tie my shoe, and I'm like, I love him. It's okay.
So there was a real off-screen connection, which I suspect would be the case because Mark is just, he has a warm, open heart. And so their scenes were beautiful together, but they needed to have enough weight that hopefully people feel what you're describing, which is through the long stretches of episodes where they're apart, that connection is still a spine of the story. And it's a big part of why I wanted to direct all of it. Is I'm a dad to 4 girls. I know what the father-daughter connection can be like. It's as beautiful a connection as we get in this life. And I wanted to, in some ways, create a love story about that father-daughter connection.
Well, I want to congratulate all of you on a beautiful series, and I hope that you all enjoyed seeing it with us. Congratulations. Thank you.